Welcome back to this latest episode of Japan's top business interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Story, President, Dale Carnegie Tokyo Training. My special guest today is Johnny Yoo, who is the CEO for WeWork here in Japan. Johnny, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, tell us a little bit about the backstory here. I mean, WeWork is a major brand, famous brand, and it's owned by Softbank, famous company. Master-san is famous. The whole thing's famous. So how is it you got into this work, and what's your background in Japan particularly?
So in a nutshell, I was in finance for 22 years. I was a trader. I was at pretty much all the big bulge bracket Wall Street firms outside of JP Morgan. But most of my longest tenure was at Goldman.
Trading? What were you trading?
I was trading equities and options.
Oh, okay.
But by the end of, in the end, when I was actually a trader at Citibank or Citigroup, I was actually trading pretty much everything I wanted except for government bonds. So I was trading CDSs, convertible bonds, futures options, pretty much everything.
Right. So I guess, trader is a very high pressure type of work, and, you make it or you don't make it in terms of the numbers, right? But at what point did you decide, okay, I want to do something else, or, I've had it with trading, or trading's had it with me, or I don't know how these things work exactly, but...
I've always considered trading to be more or less, sort of like being a professional athlete. It's really all performance-based, and if you can do it, then, you can actually have a long career. But much like being an athlete, I don't think it's something that you should be doing in your 50s, 60s, or 70s. I mean, investing is one thing, but I always thought that my tenure as a trader would probably be about 20 years maximum.
Right.
So around the 22nd year was the major earthquake, the Fukushima earthquake, and that sort of really had a deep impact on me. And
so you were here then?
I was in Tokyo.
You're in Tokyo. Okay.
I was trading that day.
Oh, okay.
Oh yeah, and it was a crazy day, and I was at the 22nd floor of the Shinmaru Biru in Marunouchi. And that was a long earthquake. It was 5 minutes of shaking. Yeah. And literally at one point, I was looking across the street, the Marubiru. I'm at the Shinmaru, and it was going like this.
Really?
Yeah, for 5 minutes. And sort of my world changed that day. But a few months later, I thought, okay, I think I need to go and do something else with my life.
Yeah. And when did you first get to Japan? I mean, you said you're in Wall Street, you're working there, and then somehow you turn up in Japan. How did that happen?
Well, actually, so I came to Japan in 1990.
Okay.
So, I'm quite old. And in 1990, I'm sure most people don't remember this, but the U.S. was actually in recession. This was Bush Sr., George H.W. Walker Bush was the president. And there was a recession right before the 92 election. And anyways, I tried to get a job on Wall Street straight out of university. And I got rejected everywhere because at that point, because of the recession, they weren't hiring any non-MBAs.
Oh, really? Okay.
And I wasn't interested in getting an MBA because I was sort of a poor college student at the time. So I said, okay, what am I going to do if I can't get into finance in the US? I had a friend in Japan called me up and said, there's a bubble in Japan, and they're looking for bilingual people. By the way, you speak Japanese? I said, yeah, I think good enough. And so surely...
Well, how is it you speak Japanese?
I was born in Japan. So I'm Korean American made in Japan. That's the way I sort of put it.
Okay, that's a good way of summarizing it.
Yeah. So I was born in Kyoto. But when I was 5 years old, I moved to the States with my family. And then we became naturalized U.S. citizens when I was about 12 or so. And so I became a U.S. citizen. I had a Korean passport. The Korean passport's great now. You go anywhere in the world. You could actually go to more countries with a Korean passport than a U.S. passport now.
Is that right?
Yes. It's actually one of the top 3 passports in the world now.
Wow.
Japan, I think, is number 1. Singapore, Korea. U.S. is sort of in the middle now because there's a lot of countries that won't. You can't go to those countries with a U.S. passport these days.
Okay, amazing. And even though you're there for the first 5 years, somehow the Japanese stuck in the background. But I'm presuming that your parents are probably speaking Korean to you at home.
Well, actually, I was part of the diaspora of Koreans living in Japan. So my father actually spoke Korean, but my mother not so great.
Oh, really? Okay.
So her native tongue was Japanese, but obviously in Japan you can be born. My mother was born in Japan, but of Korean descent, so she never had her Japanese citizenship.
Right.
And I was born in Japan, but once again.
What language did your parents talk to you in?
In Japanese.
In Japanese. Because I always think it's interesting because Korean grammatical structures are identical
to Japanese,
right? So if you're a Korean speaker, all you got to do is get the vocab,
vocabulary
and the pronunciation.
That's it.
And it's a big chunk of the work's done, you know. So it's very close, isn't it?
So the Japanese and Koreans that actually, you know, learn each other's language, they usually are able to actually speak very, you know, sort of competently by about 6 months.
Yeah.
Sometimes faster.
Yeah.
And, you know, the Korean alphabet is super easy as well.
Yeah, with the Hangul, right?
Yeah, the Hangul, you could actually learn that in 2 hours.
Yeah.
It's so easy. It's just, you know, circles, boxes, and lines. I mean, it's really easy. It's the most logical phonetic alphabet I've ever seen.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, I can speak a little bit of Korean. I can read Korean, but I've forgotten all the words because I don't really,
Right.
I've never really lived in Korea. So, you know, I'm ancestrally, my family is Korean, but I've spent most of my life in either Japan or the U.S.
States, right?
Yeah.
So you come back and you're working in Japan, and then Fukushima, and you're starting to think about, okay, next stage in my career. So what do you do from there?
So after the earthquake, I wasn't feeling that secure about Tokyo because of, you know, Fukushima and the nuclear, and I had a young son at the time.
We had a nice nuclear cloud.
Exactly.
Right? We couldn't drink water for like a week, right? Because everything was bloody radioactive.
Right. And so I moved my family to Osaka for a while, and then they actually liked it. And so I moved to Osaka, and I was actually commuting back and forth from Osaka. Okay. Yeah. I was doing the commute way before it was actually, you know, popular or allowed. And then, you know, one thing led to another, and I said, you know what, I'd like to see if I can actually do something else other than finance. And you know, at the time I was doing okay, you know, had some savings and so forth, and so I figured I'd try my hand at sort of a venture business. But you know, Tokyo is where all the action's at. I mean, Osaka is the second largest city, but it's not that sophisticated. I mean, I might get in trouble later with Osaka people. I mean, you know, I'm very much you know, a fan of the Kansai area because I'm from Kyoto. But in terms of, you know, the kind of jobs that were available, you know, it's not at all like, you know, there's a consulting or there's real estate or finance or technology. I mean, most of the really, really good jobs for foreigners like me are in Tokyo. So when I went to Osaka, I really couldn't find anything. So I figured I had to do something on my own. So I tried. So,
I mean, the concentration of everything in Tokyo now is incredible.
Yeah.
I lived in Kobe and worked in Osaka for 4 years. And, you know, after the earthquake in 95, right, everything sort of went down, especially Kobe.
Yeah.
And it took a long time for Kobe to recover. I don't know if Kobe's ever actually recovered, to be honest. And
you're right.
It impacted,
even now.
It impacted Osaka as well. And when I moved from Osaka, I was there 96 to 2001 in Osaka. And then I moved back to Tokyo 2001. I got back to Tokyo. It was like, man, there's no recession here.
Exactly.
The restaurants were buzzing, you know. In Osaka, you don't have to worry about a booking. You just walk in, there's nobody there. It was like such a vast difference between what was going on in Kansai, what was happening in Tokyo. I was so shocked. I was like, wow. And all the decision makers politically are here, so they're not feeling any pain. You know, they look around, it looks good. Exactly. So I know what you mean about the difference of the economies. Yeah.
Well, you know, really in the 80s and 90s, Osaka was still a very vibrant economy, right? And then basically the earthquake really changed everything because my understanding is, you know, really historically the Kansai region is really the economic power center of Japan, and the politics was always, you know, in Tokyo, you know, during the Tokugawa era, those 300 years. But what happened is after the earthquake, right, because some of the infrastructure was just completely destroyed in that area. So a lot of companies decided they had to move their headquarters, or at least have a Tokyo headquarter. Then once they're here, it's actually convenient, and they just decided to stay. So you're exactly as you said, you know, from 96 to 2001, especially with the .com boom that occurred, all the action actually moved to Tokyo after that. And I don't know if Osaka has actually recovered since then.
When did you actually move from Osaka back to Tokyo?
I came back in 2017, the beginning of 2017. Okay. So I was in Osaka from end of 2011 until until the end of 2016.
Right. And what were you doing when you came back to Tokyo?
So basically in Osaka, since I couldn't find anything that was sort of adequate or appropriate for my, you know, what I consider to be my skill set, I got into a venture business with a partner, an American actually, another American I met down there at a bar, and he was doing hydroponic farming.
Hydroponics, okay.
Hydroponic farming, and it was, you know, and he had actually built a farm, but he was out of money, and so I started, you know, funding him a little bit, and then the next thing I know, I'm actually doing the whole funding and running the company at the same time, and one thing led to another, and it was a really fascinating business. I worked at it for about 3 years, and we were actually, you know, producing good products. We were producing some really beautiful lettuce that we were selling to restaurants. But the fact is, I couldn't pay myself. I could pay the farmers and I could pay the the staff, but there was no profit. I mean, the margins were so razor
tight.
thin.
Yeah.
I could never get more than 100 yen per per head of lettuce.
Yeah.
And it's just in America, if you grow great lettuce, you can sell it to Whole Foods for $2 or $3. Then you can make money. In Japan, you've got the double headwind of basically you can't get any real good pricing power with lettuce because there's so many other alternatives to vegetables here, and they're all cheap. And the other thing is that distribution in Japan, although it's such a small country, it's really expensive, very expensive to distribute product here.
So what do you do after the venture?
So once I figured out that wasn't going to happen, I was talking to my wife, and she's like, maybe we should go back to Tokyo. Why don't you talk to some of your Tokyo friends? And so I started calling around from people. And one of my friends who had actually called me right before I started the hydroponic farming business, he was at Softbank. He's my friend Eric Gann, who was the founder of eAccess and eMobile. And he had been merged with Softbank back in 2014, 2015. So, and he and I have been friends forever. We worked at Goldman for the exact same period.
Oh, okay. All right.
So he was like the head of the telco. And he was a top-ranked analyst in the telecommunications business. And I was one of the top traders at Goldman Sachs. And so, we've always been friends. And he said, if you're free, why don't you come help me with this WeWork project that I'm working on? And I said, sure.
Had you heard of WeWork by that time?
I had not, because I was in Kansai.
Oh, okay.
I was in Osaka, and WeWork had not actually landed in Japan at that point. And I had no idea that there was a boom going on in the share office business in the U.S. I had heard about Uber and Airbnb, but I hadn't heard about WeWork yet. So he said, study 24 hours and then come meet me tomorrow. And the next thing I know, a day later, I'm in Tokyo and I'm meeting with Adam Newman and his whole.
Oh, Adam Newman! You met Adam Newman?
Oh, yeah. I met with Adam Newman and his entire crew and entourage really, and it was quite.
Now, is he as charismatic as they say?
I think he's more than probably even people expect.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that his portrayal is very accurate, but he's actually more charismatic than I think you would expect.
Right.
And
what made him so charismatic? When you say, people, we know the word charismatic, right?
Yeah.
We probably recognize it when we see it, but how do you sort of describe someone who's charismatic? How would you describe what was charismatic about him?
Well, so first of all, he's just larger than life. I think he's like 6'5".
Oh, wow, he's a big dude.
He's huge. Yeah, he's big. He's, handsome.
Yeah.
He's got long hair.
Yeah.
And I mean, everything about him sort of just, stands out.
Yeah.
And he's got sort of this slight Israeli accent.
Yeah.
He's highly, eloquent and articulate.
Right.
And then with that accent, it's just like, he starts talking. Some people have actually said that, and I don't want to speak for others, but there's a few people in the venture business who ended up becoming early investors in WeWork. And one who is extremely famous actually said that he considered Adam Newman the greatest salesperson that he's ever met. And this is a person that's been in the business for 40 years.
Right,
yeah.
right.
And it's true. I mean, Adam Newman is an incredible salesman. I mean, he can latch onto an idea, and I mean, he's one of those like he could sell ice to an Eskimo kind of person.
Sort of thing, yeah.
Really. Exactly.
Okay.
Extremely talented.
Well, they also say that Son, Son is also a very charismatic sort of guy.
Yes.
Is in a different way, I suppose. I'm not sure, or the same way.
Well, Masa, it's I would say it's very different. I mean, I don't know Masa that well, to be perfectly honest.
Right.
I mean, I spent a lot of time with Adam because I was on the WeWork project. But Masa comes from the school of hard knocks, right? I mean, everyone knows his story. He grew up in in not such a wealthy or even middle class family in Kyushu. Had to overcome a lot of difficulties. So he's just tough. Masa is extremely committed. He works harder than anybody I know. I mean, that man puts in the hours and is constantly thinking. So it's not just he is a visionary. I mean, clearly he's a visionary, but the amount of hours and work that he puts into his craft, I mean, amazing.
Really?
Yes. So he's got both. He's got the visionary aspect, but he's also definitely has, the commitment, the ambition, the aspiration, and the effort.
So when you met Adam, must your son bought into the company?
Oh yeah.
He was already existing as an investor.
Well, whenever there was a deal to be done, Masa would make the decision and say, Eric, you need to bring them to Japan. And Eric was in charge of the business development unit at Softbank. And so Eric invited Adam, and so at that point, the project was now rolling. And so Eric needed me to basically be the project manager, to bring WeWork to Japan. So WeWork was at that point already highly successful globally. They had 130 locations in all the major cities in the world except Tokyo. They could not crack Tokyo on their own. So it made a lot of sense for Adam to actually partner with Softbank and with Masa, because Masa clearly opened doors in Japan, and Adam was not able to do that with his own crew at the time.
That Israeli charm didn't quite penetrate the Japanese.
Not the Japanese, not the traditional Japanese landlords. No, the traditional Japanese landlords. You have to also remember, back in 2016 and 17, occupancy in Japanese buildings was at 98, 99%. Yeah. So there was hardly anything open. And the thing about WeWork is we need big spaces. We need one floor. We need 500 tsubo or 1,000 tsubo of space, right? So it's got to be a large space, or it doesn't really make sense, because our business is all sort of centered around having a big community area, the lounge that people could hang out at and interact and actually really drive innovation and community. So WeWork, my understanding is, I'm not 100% sure if this is true or not, but that WeWork had sent their real estate team in from Hong Kong and China to open up Japan, and they weren't able to get any leases the first year.
Yeah, I'll bet. And also, I mean, you had companies like Corp here already.
Regis.
You had Regis here, who
Work Styling had already started.
Yeah, they weren't doing exactly what WeWork was doing, but they were doing a concept that's not that dissimilar.
That's
and
correct.
they were quite successful. I mean, Alf, who owns Corp, amazing guy too. If you've ever met Alf, he's a character. He's an absolute character, I can tell you. But anyway, that's another podcast about Alf. But
please, yeah. I'd love to see that podcast.
Yeah, it'd be a long one. He's got a long story to tell. But so that's how you got into running WeWork, right?
So in 2017, before WeWork was even an entity in Japan, or there was a sort of a paper company already established, but before there were any operations, I got assigned as the project manager for bringing the WeWork to Japan. First, making sure that we actually created the deal between SoftBank and WeWork, because it was originally it was a joint venture. We're 100% SoftBank Corp owned now, but at the time it was half SoftBank and half WeWork.
Right. Now here's a question: Did you find that any of Adam's charisma?
Yeah.
Is it transferable? Can you absorb any of that stuff? Does it work like that? Or you just observe it in somebody else and go, wow, I couldn't be like that?
Well, I'm sure there are certain things that you can take away from it that you might be able to imitate. But really, at the point of not being 6'5", and extremely, handsome, it's like, it's very different, right? I'm sort of average height and,
You're quite handsome.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. But, I've got my own style. But no, I mean, it was always fascinating watching him.
I'll bet it was. Yeah.
And I mean, he could walk into a room and like everyone would take notice. I mean, I walk into a room and no one even bothers to even turn around, right?
I guess you're 6'5", you're going to occupy a fair bit of space, right? Yeah.
There is something about being a big, tall person that is very different. And I'll never know because I'm not that person, right? But he actually had that going for him, and he really he knew how to utilize that advantage. So I would love to say that I learned some things that are applicable to me, but probably not. Now he's a very unique person. I mean, and he's still very motivated, and I think he's working on several businesses right now. So he's still very highly connected to the entire Silicon Valley tech industry in the U.S. And so I wouldn't be surprised if he actually
made so much money. You wonder why he bothers doing anything. But anyway,
he's still young.
He's still young. Well, that's true.
He's in his early 40s still.
Yeah, that's right. You think, forget about that, right? So if you think about, you started WeWork within the sort of spectrum of SoftBank has got an established system here, and then you have to start recruiting people. So were you getting people sort of transferring over from SoftBank to join the joint venture, or were you going out and hiring people from square one, or how did that work?
Well, so initially, so I've been attached to WeWork, or I've been part of the process with WeWork from day one. But I was not a part of the original management team. I was a board observer, so I've been to every single board meeting since the very beginning, and to every deal meeting. But the original management team was actually sent from New York. And it was the first CEO of WeWork Japan was actually Adam Newman's brother-in-law, Chris Hill. Chris and I are actually...
I met him.
Yeah,
I
right?
met him. I met him.
And so Chris basically brought, some very...
English guy.
Well, he's American.
Is he? I thought he's English.
No, he's American. He's American.
I
Grew up in New York. He and I are still friends. I mean, we were just exchanging text messages a few nights ago. I think he's going to be coming to visit maybe soon, and so I'm sure I'll have a meal with him. But Chris actually was sort of so Adam was the visionary and the founder. Chris was the original COO, and he had actually opened up the first 100 locations. He was the guy that could implement, really execute. Chris is really a very talented individual as well. And so that team worked out really well. And so Chris actually told me that he had actually started the first 100 or more locations globally. And so he had been to every single one of these locations, built the teams there. And then when he came to Japan, he sort of had the formula in place. He knew who he needed from New York. So he brought, 5 or 6 of his, top lieutenants with him. And then they just started hiring like crazy. And, WeWork was such a, good brand at the time. There's so much positive buzz around WeWork entering Japan that, we were getting looks at some of the, the most talented young people, clearly bilingual, if not more than bilingual, great backgrounds in technology, marketing, retail, all the things that, we needed. So we were able to hire, Chris was able to hire some really talented people.
And in that sense, if I think back, for example, when Virgin Airlines opened in Australia, they went after extremely extrovert, almost showwomen type of people to be cabin crew.
Yes.
So when you got on a Virgin flight, it wasn't just your typical flight. These were like, very extrovert people, really putting on a show here.
Yep.
And they had a very defined selection process to find those people who could step out of themselves, to have that differentiation.
Yes.
I'm wondering, did they do something similar? So they say, we're going to establish WeWork, we're going to have a different sort of cool vibe here. So we're looking for cool people. You're boring, dull Japanese, they're never going to produce a vibe that's interesting for anybody. So were they looking for that sort of vibe?
Absolutely. Everyone that they hired was, by Japanese standards, very extroverted, bigger than life, charismatic. I mean, there were so many good-looking people.
Yes.
I mean, really.
Yeah.
Everyone was like really good-looking, but also smart and really nice. So I was like, wow. I mean, Japanese society, you can actually find those people, but the combination of all three is not that easy to hire. But they were also the pay packages back then were actually quite nice because they knew they actually had to pay, and so they were able to attract a lot of talent because they were like you said, it was cool, it was fun. Compensation was definitely competitive, and being able to work here, I think it's something that I think most people thought they would be really good on their resumes as well.
And so, at what point did you step in and take it over?
So, in 2019, Chris left. This is sort of at the end of 2019. WeWork was supposed to do an IPO. It got delayed. And at that time, basically Adam was asked to resign. And so anyone that was associated with Adam was also asked to leave. And so Chris basically, had to leave at that point. This was back in the end of 2019. His CFO was basically immediately elevated to acting CEO and then eventually CEO. And he was, he and I are still friends. His name is Kazuyuki Sasaki, and I'm still close with them. We worked well together. So Sasaki-san and I, we were trying to get WeWork back, and really 2020 was looking great until COVID.
Until COVID, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
And Sasaki-san was, he was a great CFO, and I think he would have been, fabulous for this business if it weren't for COVID. But COVID hit, and COVID in Japan, if you remember, went a lot longer than most other nations because of the Olympics. Right. This is the one thing that I always tell about the story is that if it weren't for the Tokyo Olympics being delayed to 2021, but then also Tokyo and Japan deciding to shut down the entire city from January until the end of September, I never contemplated that as a possibility, right? So when I took over in 2021, I thought for sure that we would be slowly opening up the city so that the Olympics would be held in normal fashion. but we ended up doing Olympics in a very, sort of strange way with no audience, no participation from from people watching, the spectators, and it was only the athletes, and that was such a strange thing. And in our business, you can't sell real estate unless you can actually show it, and most people could not come for tours because the management had told them do not go unless it's absolutely necessary. And taking a tour of a WeWork location wasn't considered absolutely necessary to the task at hand. So 2021.
Great time to be taking over.
Well, exactly. So 2021 was a brutal year. Luckily that was the bottom of our occupancy, but yeah, we almost didn't survive that. Luckily, we figured out ways to survive it, and we had good parent companies and had enough reserves in place. But that was a very, very tough year, 2021.
And you're recovering now, and I think we've sort of come out of COVID. We actually haven't come out of COVID in the sense of people sort of catching COVID. Right. And there's a huge number of those in the market, coming down with COVID. And I caught COVID, a couple of times after as well. So it's still out there. But
it's out there.
Psychologically, somehow we think we've come out of COVID.
Yeah, it's sort of like a bad cold.
Like we move on. Yeah. We move on, right? So we think we're back to normal.
Yeah.
So if you think about, from the time you were here, from your trading days, right through to now, you're running WeWork. If you think about getting the teams engaged and to really be, motivated, loyal, go the extra mile, that type of thing, what things have you found have worked well for you as a leader to encourage people to be like that?
Well, so in Japan, right, I think Japan is very different from other societies that, Japan has been in this sort of 30-year phase of stagnation. So the motivations are a little bit different here. First of all, you really have to sort of establish trust here, right? Whether you're the boss or you're not the boss doesn't really matter. The personal aspects of a relationship are extremely important. So, what I always do is basically I listen, right? I try to go out of my way. I present the vision, and then I say, please, tell me where I'm wrong. And I think most of the people that I work with would say, yeah, I'm a good listener. So I listen to their concerns, and then I try to create a solution for the things that they're concerned about or the things that are bothering them. And really, the role of a CEO, really of any company, is to assemble as talented a team as possible, and then give them an environment that they're going to be successful. So that's really it, right? So let's share the vision. Does that vision make sense? For example, you can't.
So on that point, one of the issues, I get all the vision part.
Right.
Believe in that, very important. One of the issues, though, is that at the sort of top level, everyone gets it.
Right.
But often when you get down to the very bottom, the youngest, newest person, do they get it? And does the middle management actually filter that down and explain and communicate what you're thinking to the people at the bottom? This is always the issue that, it's on the wall in a nice frame and everyone reads it, but no one can repeat it. No one can remember it. And are they living it? We've always this discrepancy. So what have you found works well to actually make sure that the vision that you're explaining to people is actually percolating all the way down to the bottom and people are able to take it on board and live it?
So, well, first of all, we used to have a lot of all hands meetings. We would do that at least once a quarter, if not once a month as needed, or town halls. So, initially the first year we were doing that all the time because there, it was constantly having to explain what's going on. Are all these people leaving? Are we going to be okay? There was a lot of fear inside the company. So I would actually get in front of the mic constantly and we would do all hands. At first, it was during COVID, so we had to do it remotely, unfortunately. But the message was getting out there. And then I've always had an extremely open policy. I'm like, here's my phone number. Here's my email address. Here's my Slack. Anybody in the company, and by the way, there's only 250, 300 of us, so please feel free to just directly buzz me, and I will respond within 24 to 40.
And do people do that?
Not a lot, but a fair amount of people tried it, and I always responded, and I had really great dialogues with people, and these were usually the opinion makers within within certain groups. And so as long as I'm communicating properly with them, they would filter it out. But the the town halls and the all hands actually helped quite a bit. But also I think the fact that I would never refuse a meeting. I invited tons of people out to lunch, right? And said, look, let's get to know each other. Any question you have, just send it to me and I will respond to it. I think that helped a lot.
The other thing about communication, you think classically, right?
Yeah.
I'm the boss.
Yeah.
I've told them, so they've got it.
Right.
But then you discover they ain't got it, and you realize, I've already told you that, but they haven't got it. They haven't, for whatever reason, you think you've communicated it. They haven't absorbed it.
Right.
And they actually don't have it, you know, and you realize, oh man, I've got to tell them again. And I've got to tell them again. And you've got to keep telling them before it actually sinks in. So it's always a bit of a shock when you realize, well, I thought I expressed that quite clearly.
Right.
But you don't seem to have the message here. So that's always a bit of a challenge, I think, in terms of what we think as leaders is the required amount of communication compared to what's actually required. What's been your experience around that?
So I'm lucky because, in university, 30 years ago, I was actually planning on being a doctor like every good Korean boy. My mom had trained me or brainwashed me to be a doctor since I was 3. Well, I go to, university and I'm like, I can't do 10 years of med school. There's no way. So I'm studying economics and that was so easy. I mean, it was just like this. I'm at university. I might as well get something out of it. So I thought about what was my biggest weakness at the time. And really, I wasn't a great speaker by any means. I wasn't really great at like English literature or writing papers. I could get by, but I wasn't great. So, being sort of like, the masochist that I was back then, I decided, okay, I'm going to study rhetoric now.
Okay.
And people are like, what's rhetoric? Well, it's sort of a combination of like history, comparative literature, English. It's a lot of writing papers, but the essence of rhetoric is it's the art of persuasion. It's the art of persuasion. And so, for example, the most simple concept of rhetoric is always know your audience. Because if you're talking to a hostile audience and you go in there and say, you guys are a bunch of jerks and I hate you, then that's it. That's the end of it. But if you go into a hostile audience and say, I think most of your points are valid, but I think that we're not, properly communicating. I mean, you don't have to lose all of it. So really understand your audience. So when I came here, I really, because I had been associated with the company for all the years that I wasn't CEO, I felt like I knew who I was talking to. So I kept my messages really simple, really simple. For example, the first message that I gave at my first meeting when I was introduced was, I said, please remember one word, right? You don't have to remember anything else about this, and I spoke for 30 minutes. I said, respect. And they're like, why? And I said, because there's a lack of it here. There was a very big lack of respect when I first came to WeWork.
And why was that?
Everything was siloed. Business was in trouble. People were starting to point fingers at each other. There wasn't great communication. There was still a big contingent of like only English speaking people. And so there was just a lot of communication problems. And, when times get tough, some people, sort of fall into a shell. Some people start pointing fingers. A lot of that was going on, but it was really just a lack of communication. So I said, look.
But there's also a lot of factionalism in Japanese corporates. You have siloed divisions fighting with each other because the chief of that division is competing with the chief of that division to get to the very top, and the patron system and all the people down the bottom are fighting. It's like, what about the opposition? What about the competition outside here?
Right.
We're not worried about them want to fight with each other. So that, I think you see that in Japanese big corporates.
Oh yeah, but big corporates, but we're a company with 250, 300 people. And that was happening way too often here from my, my perspective. I just thought, okay. I said, look, you don't have to like each other, but you're all professional. So let's respect each other. First of all, that was it. So my first message, it went very clear. It was it. My second message 5 months later was, one word again, decide. I'm like, can you please decide if you want to be here or not? Everyone was against it. Everyone on the marketing team, public
against what, having that message?
Yeah,
they didn't think that was going to make people leave. They thought going to destroy the business. People are going to depart.
They thought it was high risk, and I said it's okay. We have to take that risk because we need to basically get down to the core of the people that want to be here. But that message resounded. But it was a simple message. It was like, do you want to stay here? Because it's going to be brutal, right? In 2020, I told them, it is going to be tough for at least a year or two. And please stay if you want to, because then we will rebuild this business together. But if you're thinking, that's not for me, that's okay. Let's let's stay friends. Let's have an amicable relationship going forward. But it's okay. And the lucky thing about it for me at the time was there's so many talented people here. They all got really great jobs, so they were all happy afterwards.
Okay. Worked out well.
Yeah, so it was sort of a win-win situation.
So when you come up with ideas here, I mean, some companies have rather formalized ideation methodologies, techniques, etc. Others have very poor methodologies, like my old boss, who used to stand next to the whiteboard with a pen and say, give me ideas, and then destroy them. Oh, that's a stupid idea. No, we tried that, didn't work. Give me another idea.
Wow.
And everyone's staring at their shoes, not making any eye contact because they don't want to get involved anymore.
Right.
So it was never a great way of harvesting ideas. But have you found any particular ways that are very good for getting ideas from team members?
No, yeah, absolutely. So, that's if I have like one strength from a business perspective is I'm very open-minded and very flexible. So I like to consider everything. I'll just throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. And so I bring that mentality, and everyone understands that. I've never refused meetings with anybody that wants to talk to me, and that's another great source of ideation. But what I tell the staff is I always give them sort of a general parameter. This is the overall goal. We're clearly not going to get there with status quo. What are the areas that we can improve upon? And I always give them like choices like there's low hanging fruit. There's the stuff that's really easy to do. Let's start there and build momentum. But let's always be looking to improve. And how do we do that? And always try to think of it from the perspective of the member to make sure that it's like, oh, that would be really well accepted, or it would make the members so much happier. And so those are the issues. So let's listen, let's ask the questions, let's listen to the members, and then try to figure out how we can actually create new products and services that will make the experience so much better. And then that will obviously drive the top and bottom line, hopefully, going forward. So that's sort of the methodology I use in terms of really trying to promote more creativity and innovation inside.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. Leading is easy. Getting people to follow is the hard part. That is a great quote from Yogi Berra. Surprisingly, despite the complexities of leading here in Japan, everyone has to work it out by themselves. Foreign leaders want practical, applicable, expert advice. This is now available for the first time in history. Grab your copy of Japan Leadership Mastery on Amazon today and avoid the mystery, trial and error, especially the errors. I find one of my things I have to control myself is I'm a bit of an ideas-oriented person.
Yeah.
And I get a lot of ideas.
Yep.
And if I'm not careful, all the ideas are my ideas. And then you suddenly realize, hang on a minute, I'm the only one coming up with ideas around here because I've created a system where I just keep pumping them out.
Right.
I'm very, expired, and I come up with things, and they're not getting any ideas from the people on the team. So I have to stop myself and say, well, you better shut up for a while and let them bring the ideas to me, or have a means of getting the ideas out. Unfortunately, in Dale County, we have a very good system of getting ideas out of people. It cuts out gender, it cuts out status, it cuts out age, it cuts out stage, and longevity, and all that sort of typical stuff that in a Japanese organization really stifles creativity. I strip all that out.
Right.
The total sum of the ideas out, which is a really great system. So that's helpful for us. Yeah,
please tell me about that.
Yeah, I will. I'll take you through that. It works extremely simple, but it needs some.
I'd love to learn about that.
It needs some discipline to make it work, but it does work well.
That's fabulous.
Yeah, in terms of other thing too, I mean, Japan, like everywhere else, trust is very important. But I think in Japan, I always think somehow in this country, trust is it's got a lot of import that's even more so than other places. Like, when I was back in the day when you used to get a lot of resumes, you don't get a lot of resumes anymore, but back in the day when you used to get a lot of resumes, you'd be going through the resumes, you'd be talking to people, and they'd have these blanks, or they'd change jobs. You ask, well, what happened in the blank? Well, I was working till 11:30 every night, and I got sick and I couldn't work, and the typical Japan way of doing things. Or they'd say, oh, well, my senior called me and I quit this company and I joined their company.
Oh, I see.
Totally emotional decision, totally emotional decision. And because the trust was there.
Yeah.
And you realize, wow, Japanese are making a lot of decisions based around this trust, and it's not based around logic. And so you realize that trust here is such a critical element. So, you've had tough times in the organization. You've had to see people depart. You've had to bring people in. What have you found that works well for getting trust with the team?
Right.
That they trust you. What works well?
Well, so once again, as I think I mentioned a little bit earlier, it's really just I'm open, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's always an open form of communication with me. But really, I'm asking them questions. I mean, just to go back to the last topic, when ideation or generating ideas. I'm like the idea guy as well. I'm sure we're very similar, but I can't do it all on my own. So ideas come in, and then I basically target someone that might be interested in that, and I hand it off to them. So then it becomes theirs. I might be the originator, but who cares? I mean, origination is only one part of the process. So I pass that off, and then with suggestions, and then they may say not interested or yes or no, and then there's a conversation. And I never force anybody. My sort of management style is in Japan. Back in the day in the Showa period, if a boss orders something, you do it. No questions asked. That doesn't work anymore.
No.
Right? So I've never given anybody. Well, I'm sure I've maybe given an order here or there, but generally speaking, I would say 95%. I'm actually persuading my colleagues to do something because it makes sense, right? And once they buy in, they're going to do a lot better job than being forced to do something they don't want to do. So that's, I think, the way I've built trust is that first, I never force them to do anything. And secondly, I really work hard to persuade them that whatever we're talking about, it makes sense for them, makes sense for the firm, for the company.
There's also that element too of being true to your word.
Yes.
Walking the talk, doing what you say you're going to do, being consistent.
Yes.
Also, I think in Japan, being predictable.
Yes.
Unpredictable bosses make people nervous.
Yes. Absolutely.
I remember recently,
I think that's true for any country, though.
Yeah,
right?
I think so. But I remember recently, I was in the offices early. One of the guys came in, and he said, "Are you okay?"
He asked you.
Yeah, he asked, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, I've got an issue that's bothering me."
Oh.
But what I didn't realize was that was on my face.
Right. And they can all tell.
And he could tell straight away.
Right.
He could tell something was wrong. And that's when I realized, my thespian ability to mask my true emotional state with having this permanent, sunny, optimistic Aussie image is shredding a bit of the edges here. And I better work on that.
You're human, it comes out. You can't hide all your emotions.
Yeah,
right?
well, I think as the boss, you've got to be that rock of solid optimism, no matter how bad it looks or how bad it is, that they can look at you as someone who thinks it's going to work and you look like it's going to work. And so be very careful what's on the face. It just reminded me, okay, I couldn't see it, but he could see it straight away. So,
well, they're looking at you every day, right?
That's right.
In Japan, communication is so much more just the language that you're saying. Has a lot to do with your posture, your demeanor, all of that. I mean, it's a very high. It's called high context language.
High context, yeah. Well, I always talk about the card-carrying guild of boss watchers in Japan. How they are studying you as the boss in minute detail every day. And I think anyone who's got any sort of emotional wave going on, a fluctuation. It must be very, very hard to keep people because they can't predict, and suddenly you're explosive or, you're friendly and you're explosive and friendly. They don't know when they come in, can I talk to the boss today? Right. Can I bring this up with the boss today? Is he going to bite my head off or she's going to bite my head off? Very hard to be a boss like that, I think. So that stability of your self-awareness about who you are and how you portray, as I say, the mask fell off that day.
Right.
And when he said it to me, I realized, oh, yeah, I forgot that this is worrying, but I'm not allowed to show that on my face.
You need to be very careful about that.
Because
everyone notices. Everyone notices.
You take the mood down in an instant, gloomy. So yeah, hard. In terms of if you think about, the experience you've had many years in Japan, different things come up. If someone called you up and said, "Hey, Johhny, look, my company's appointed me country head for Japan."
Yep.
And I'm going to be arriving shortly to take over the operation, but I don't know much about Japan, and visit there was great. Love the sushi, it was fantastic, but I don't know how to run a company in Japan. What advice would you give someone who, they don't speak Japanese, they don't know Japan, they've got to come in, they've got to run an existing organization? What would be some advice you'd give them?
Well, I think first of all, it's really all about the people.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to find one or two people that you'll be able to trust, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is so key.
Well, just on that point though, you've heard the term the gaijin handler.
Yes.
Right? And this is the Japanese fluent English speaker.
Yes.
Who, snows the gaijin boss who doesn't know much about Japan and sort of manipulating them, or the grey eminence type of thing, So you've got to be a bit careful about that.
That's a really good point. As a matter of fact, a lot of the people yesterday night were talking about that exactly. So when you make that selection, it should not be based on language ability. If anything, that should be a warning sign. That when someone is completely bilingual and they're like really friendly and they want to be at your side, it's like, oh, that's nice to have, but you need to go and talk to all the key people in the organization, especially the middle managers. And even if they don't speak any English, hire a translator, hire an interpreter.
Well, just on that too, the interpreter.
Yep.
The interpreter isn't a skilled business person.
No.
They are a specialist of language translation.
That's true.
However,
yes,
when you don't speak Japanese, suddenly the interpreter is a vital person for you, and suddenly you might start asking the interpreter their opinion about what people and what's going on. And I think this is a dangerous thing too.
Of course,
you've got to understand they are an interpreter. They are not a business consultant.
No, they're not.
But sometimes people get that confused and they start putting too much weight on what usually they're not deeply skilled in business, or they're often young.
Yes.
What they think. So that's another trap, I think.
You're right, but at least you can maybe have a straight conversation, even though there's the language barrier, and that will actually give you some data points about what's actually really happening. And most Japanese people, I would say, are very honest, right? And so if they get asked direct questions, they will answer them, especially if you're going to be their boss. And so just to be able to don't take the interpreter as an advisor. They're just interpreting.
Yeah.
I mean, in the perfect world, what you would love to find is have a friend who's established in business here already and has some language ability, and have them come and help assess the situation and give you advice on who the best people are to have around you.
I mean, there are fortunately these days there are a lot of organizations. I belong to many of them.
Right. Chambers
of Commerce,
yes.
Delphi Network is an example. We talked about that last night, right? So you can get access to other CEOs, and if you're new, these people have been here a long time, like you've been here a long time. I've been here a long time, and you can actually get people to give you a bit of a texture and a bit of an
Absolutely.
angle.
That's a great way to get
which helps
acclimated. You should definitely find some organizations with lots of veterans. Probably half or more of them are quite bilingual, and establish a relationship with those people. Yeah, absolutely.
You're right. You can actually get people to help you, and you may not accept their advice, but at least it gives you some perspectives which may not occur to you individually.
Exactly.
What other advice would you give them?
Well, I would say that Japan is a very unique culture for business. And even though it's part of the G7 and considered to be a very logical Western nation, it really isn't. It's actually very Asian. It's also capitalistic, but it's actually very socialistic at the same time. There's a lot of sort of contradictions and dichotomies. And you can sit there and just say, well, that doesn't make sense, or you could just sort of accept it. And you really just have to accept that there are a lot of things that may not make sense to you until, a year or 2 years, and you've actually spent some time here.
Just on that point, though, often a very classic scenario, right? The foreign organization has hired in a senior Japanese executive
Right.
to run the organization.
Yep.
Right, retirement age type of thing. And they run it like an island, completely separate from the rest of the organization, like a sort of fiefdom or a castle.
Yes.
Or shiro in the middle of the ocean here. And at some point, headquarters realizes we don't know what the hell's going on in Japan.
Right.
And they're hiding stuff from us, and we've got to get rid of that retiree and put one of our people in there so we can find out what the hell's going on.
Exactly.
So they give you the marching orders, for example. Okay,
Right.
you are going to Japan. You've got to fix it over there.
Right.
You got to do this. You got to do that. We're not seeing any results. So they come with some marching orders around getting results quickly.
Right.
So what you've just talked about is take your time, spend a couple of years working it. Often they're in the meat grinder of headquarters doesn't see it like that.
Of course, yeah.
So how do people deal with that?
I haven't really been in that kind of situation, but from what I've seen, then you just have to be very direct, right? Honest, direct, and
Direct with who?
Well, with everybody.
Everybody, okay. You're talking about headquarters as well?
Oh, headquarters, and with the person that you're going to relieve. It's best if you're going to be getting rid of them, just have them leave as soon as possible, right? But be polite, right? Don't make it into a personal issue. Try to be generous with them, but then really go in there and just lay out why this is happening. Don't over communicate with all the people that are going to remain. Tell them exactly why this is happening, and once again, you may end up losing a lot of people, and the initial bleeding might be actually quite severe, but that's a lot better than basically, like you said, dragging along and nothing changing for 6 months or a year. So you've got to be brutal, but I think it's I think honesty and over communicating and letting people know that the organization is not going to be shut down. If it's a situation where you're shutting down the entire organization, that's it's a completely different story.
Thing, yeah. You're sending it to end it. That's a completely different.
Right. But if you're actually coming here to basically save the company so that everyone else, besides maybe some of the top leaders, are losing their jobs, I think people are going to be happy as long as they understand that this is a new phase and it's going to be much more sort of rational and logical and much more open, and there's going to be more communication with global. I think a lot of people in Japan, as a matter of fact, when they're working for a company like that, a gaishike or a foreign company, they expect that anyways. So to be a part of a very sort of tight-knit Japanese boss bubble, I think a lot of people probably would welcome the opportunity to actually travel abroad and meet their colleagues at corporate headquarters. And so that's something that basically you should go in there and just basically say immediately, first you get rid of the problem, cut out the cancer, for example, and then just be very honest, right? Because some people are like, oh, but that's too much information. No, there's no such thing as too much information at that point. Just tell them exactly what's going to happen or what you're planning on doing.
What do you think about talking to customers and clients? Because often when you come here and then you want something to stop happening or something that you can't understand why it's happening,
right?
Often it's driven by the buyers.
Sure.
And they're controlling what's going on through their demands,
right?
Which make no sense to you because that's not how we operate back home.
Right.
And you don't know that. Right.
And
so you find that people in the organization are very customer focused or very buyer focused, and they're defending. It's almost like the Stockholm syndrome of they've been captured by the buyer.
Right.
And you feel like, are you working for us? You're working for the buyer. Who are you working for here? Right. It's that degree of they've really merged and integrated with the buying side. What do you think about spending time with customers? Because that tends to give you a perspective and appreciation of how the business actually works here. And so you can gauge what people are telling you.
Right.
How much of it you think is what they think and how much of it is maybe driven by the market or the business. What are your experience on that?
I try to, meet as many of our members as possible. I think, if anything, my staff protects me so that I'm not overwhelmed. But I always welcome a meeting, with, even if I have to go and apologize about something. Just to get in front of a leader of one of our customers or members, that is a great opportunity to establish that trust, right? And in Japan in particular, I think that having at least knowing that person, even if it's just a quick 15 or 20-minute meeting, that has meaning. It has significant more meaning than just, if that would happen like in the States or Europe, I think it's like, that was nice to meet. But in Japan, it's like the effort to meet with, your counterpart, at the customers is generally taken as a very sort of serious and, a gesture on the counterpart. So no, I love meeting with our customers, and I do that all the time as much as possible. But obviously, it doesn't always go well. But it's also a situation where we get to ask questions. Most customers aren't going to come and say, why are you doing this? When I go and visit them, first of all, do the mandatory introduction. But then it's usually me starting to ask them, how can we, serve you better? What is it that, you're unhappy about? What is it that you're happy about? And people like to be asked those questions, from the company that's, they're paying money to, right? So I think that goes a long way.
Fair enough too. And the person who's seeking your advice about, I'm going to run the operation in Japan, help me out, give some ideas here. Should that person learn Japanese?
If, you don't have to be fluent, but the Japanese, I'm sure this is true for any culture. If you can show that you're making the effort to study the language, and, even if it's just like 5 words, they, every time I walk into a room and they're expecting, the counterparty not to know any Japanese, and you actually just say a few words in Japanese and their faces light up. So I think it's, for a very little effort, it could go a long ways in terms of really, making the relationship a lot more open and friendly.
And I think people are very forgiving of mistakes, of grammatical or pronunciation or I don't know, whatever, because their expectation is so low.
Exactly.
Seriously low.
Well, and Japanese is such a tough language.
Well, it is a tough language.
It's a really tough language. There's so many different, ways to talk depending on the meeting. Are they older? Are they younger? Are they more senior? So it's highly difficult. But the fact that you've made an effort, because as you said, Greg, is that the expectations are so low that if you show a little bit of effort, then it goes a long ways.
Well, in Australia, in Australian culture, I think English culture, maybe American culture too, how well you speak is immediately aligned with how well educated you are, right? And how intelligent you are.
Yes.
So people are judging you on how you speak. So people who've got a strong accent, for example, are judged lower. And you hear this in the States with Southern accents or Western accents are judged lower or something. Or people who've got a really strong accent, they're not a native English speaker, judged lower, etc. But here, that's not the case. It's like, you speak some Japanese.
Exactly.
It's fantastic. It's quite an opposite, isn't it?
It really is. And they're really happy when a foreigner actually speaks some Japanese. Expectations are low, but they really appreciate the effort. That, you've actually made the effort to actually learn a foreign language. You're already an adult. It's not like, you're going to school now, you're actually working. But language is also, being able to speak a little bit of Japanese also shows that you're sensitive to the culture as well, that you respect the culture.
And, given you've been doing different types of work in different industries, and you've met with a lot of people, you've tried different things yourself with venture and whatever, have you come up with any particular work habits, professional habits that have served you well? Are you the guy who gets up at 4 a.m. and hammers out a full day's work before 7? Are you doing that sort of thing? Or what are any habits you've come up with?
So it's not so much a habit, but sort of a philosophy, which is I never refuse a meeting.
Okay.
I haven't refused a meeting in probably 6 or 7 years. And if someone asks for a meeting, and the reason for this is really simple. Great ideas or great relationships start from some of the most unexpected places. So obviously, if there's, it's a known criminal and they want to meet me in private, I may actually have to break that philosophy. But if there are a young person, they're starting a business, or a much older person, and they're, sort of consulting. If someone wants to meet with me, I'm like, who am I to refuse? I'm not that special. Just it's my time. And I'm always surprised by it's always the meetings that I expect the least out of that I often get the most out of. So it's not a habit, but it's sort of a practice that has been really beneficial for me. Because it's really hard in Japan to tell. So some people are so low key, and it's not like everyone is a self-promoter here, especially really successful
Hardly.
people. Right. So you never know. And if someone comes to you and they're really humble and they're actually like, sometimes you find out later, it's like, oh my gosh, this person's amazing. Like, what an honor for them to ask me for a meeting, right? So, but at the time you don't know. So it's like whenever someone asks for a meeting or some time, I always give it. The other thing is basically I always try to respond within 24 to 48 hours to every correspondence. And then the third thing, which is a habit, is I'm always extremely careful with people's names.
Okay.
We live in an international society now. I've always had this sort of pet peeve with my name, because it's Johnny Yoo, and I had a Japanese name when I was first born in Japan, and so I think the names are really important to people. That is like the one thing that the parents bestowed to them that is really important. And so you don't want to get the wrong name with people, right? You want to remember their name. You want to appreciate the proper pronunciation if you can. I think once again, that goes a long ways in terms of establishing, sort of trust and respect. And it's not that difficult. I mean, sometimes it is if it's a really long and foreign name, it can, but to make that effort. So I always double check, did I get the name right? You can mess up on titles, you can mess up on spelling, but it's like, I always make sure that the name is definitely is properly spelled or properly addressed.
Good thinking.
Yeah.
What about, perseverance, grit, ability to bounce back, finding the wherewithal to keep going? Because as you mentioned, you've in your career, you've hit some barriers, hit some obstacles, both, personally as an investor and working for the company, etc.
I've had my share of failures for sure.
Exactly, right? So that perseverance, that grit, what have you found works well to keep going when it gets really tough?
Well, so, in Japan, there's a saying, and it's actually, it's called pinch or chance ni kaeru, right? So what it means is every issue or every problem could actually become an opportunity, right? And I sort of believe that. I've been watching, my own life, you study history. And it's at those moments where you think that it's, you're looking into the abyss and like, oh, there's no solution. Something happens. And that actually turns into an incredible sort of jumping point or bouncing point, a pivot for success. So, there's so much mentally that comes into that. But really, like, there's no upside to being pessimistic as a business person, right? I mean, realist is nice, but there's so much more positive benefit to being an optimist. So even in the worst times, I'm always looking forward, right? Writing out option trees. I mean, if it goes to A, B, C, D, E, what's the step? And then so when you start looking at the world broadly like that, you start to see all the myriad of infinite possibilities, even though at that point in time, you're thinking, it couldn't possibly be worse. And as long as you've got your health, physical and mental health, there's always an opportunity, to bounce back, to come back, to actually maybe even, overcome, an impossible situation. And once that happens, once or twice, then you become so strong and resilient because it's like, oh, it's just another, issue. And
what's that talk? We talk about one door closes, another door opens,
Exactly.
Particularly in jobs, right?
So absolutely.
The company lays you off and you think it's a disaster, and then, you wind up in a better place.
Exactly.
What's that Japanese saying? Nana korobi ya oki, isn't it? The fall down 7, get up 8 times.
Exactly.
Yeah, if you think about it, though, it's not fall down once, get up twice.
No,
it's 7 times. Right?
Exactly.
7 times you fall down, you get up the 8th. That's like, whoa, okay, the Japanese taking this really seriously.
They do.
Yeah.
Japan is such a rich culture, 2,700-year history, right? I mean, it's 10 times older than the U.S. And so, yeah, of course, there's things here that are extremely...
Well, Korean culture is much older, of course.
Well, Chinese and Koreans are all older, yes. Yeah. But as one continuous nation, really, with the single emperor lineage, it's like, yeah, it's pretty amazing.
That's pretty amazing, yeah. Well, Johhny, thank you. This has been a fascinating walk through your career and what's been happening with WeWork, and interested you could share your comments about Adam Newman, who's quite a legend, and Masa, who's also a legend, in terms of people we read about in the paper, but we don't get a chance to really work with them or talk to them. But that's been fascinating. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Story. Pleasure. Thank you.
So please join us again for our next episode of Japan's top business interviews.